Hey there, I'm Joey, welcome to the channel, and in this video, I've got 10 deck lists to share with you. I built the 10 most popular commanders from Magic the Gathering's Final Fantasy set, but with a twist. Each deck only has a budget of $50. The new Final Fantasy cards are a bunch of fun. The set is also a bunch of money. The Commander Precon decks are regularly out of stock at stores and often being sold above MSRP, but a lot of players just want to enjoy some of these cool characters in a more affordable way, so I wanted to give you these deck lists as a way to help you play some epic games with these cool Final Fantasy cards in Commander, but at a more reasonable launch point, in a way that doesn't break the bank. We've got 10 decks to get through, so I'm going to show you each list, mention just a couple of key cards for that commander, as well as some potential directions to go if and when you decide that you would like to put some more expensive cards into any one of those lists. Oh, and also one more caveat, the lists don't include the price of the commander card. If I included the commander, then we wouldn't even be able to make a Vivi deck at all. But if you happen to pull one, or you proxy one, or whatever, then the rest of the 99 will be in that $50 budget, just to clarify. Every single one of these deck lists will of course be linked down in the description box below, and of course they'll be on my Architect profile too, so follow those links if you want to check them out, playtest them a little bit, or get any of those cards for yourself. I think that's all of our housekeeping, so now I think we can finally get into it. Let's get budget deck brewing. Let's go in order of popularity. First of the bunch is Y'shtola, the Esper Precon commander from Final Fantasy XIV, who does damage as you cast big spells and draws cards if players lose enough life. Y'shtola has 12,000 decks in the EDHREC database, the #1 most popular Final Fantasy commander, which I gotta admit, I did not see coming. I thought the love for games like Final Fantasy VII would overtake Y'shtola, but I forgot how much the internet loves a cat girl. Egg on my face. Now, while the most efficient way to acquire an Y'shtola deck is by buying the Precon is often out of stock and also marked up to like $100 or something. This version of the deck does still contain cards from the Precon, but they're way cheaper to get if you are purchasing them as singles, and though I know some of the most expensive Precon cards are rarely in stock at storefronts, I'm at time of recording still seeing the lower cost cards in stock on different vendor websites, so hopefully that is also true of your experience too. This version of the deck comes to $43.57, excluding the cost of Y'shtola herself. We can't go over every single synergy, but Y'shtola's trigger does damage, so curiosity effects are amazing to draw multiple cards off of her trigger. This is why so many of those types of cards now have spiked up in price, so we can't afford all of them, but we still have a good few. Importantly, this deck is reactive rather than proactive. We can sit back and remove things, counter spells, and still advance our strategy by just dealing damage and drawing cards along the way with our commander. We just gotta make sure that we properly protect her with our spells. And it's super fun to find cards that technically cost 3 or more mana, even if we're not paying that much to actually cast them, like Baleful Mastery, or Dig Through Time, or Lethal Scheme. Now, several of the best cards that meet that definition are out of our price range, but we still have some beautiful options on our budget. And to close things out, we love a good old-fashioned thing like Exsanguinate, Rite of Replication, or Fandaniel Trigger to deal damage based on how many spells we've got in our graveyard. Now, again, this version of the deck contains a lot of the cheapest singles from the Precon that I think are super fun, but honestly, if you can't get a hold of those, Y'shtola rewards a very grindy game, so this deck ends up being the perfect place to play a bunch of your favorite spells that don't get as much love elsewhere. I think these 3 cards here are our budget MVPs. Tandem Lookout is another cheap curiosity effect. A spell like Undermine counters a spell, triggers Y'shtola, and causes even more life loss to guarantee that we draw a card since someone lost 4 or more life, so those synergies are just perfect. And honestly, Revenge of Ravens is a really great substitute for pricier cards like Ghostly Prison, and it helps us from tanking too much heat from the more aggro or token players out there. If you're looking to spice things up with a bigger budget, then cards like Slaughter for that buyback, Snuff Out from the Precon, Ophidian Eye, of course, and especially Sigil of Sleep are your best friends. Sigil in particular is nasty with Y'shtola's damage trigger. What a knockout effect. Maybe also invest in a little more protective magic or hexproof for Y'shtola though, if you're gonna put a bunch of gnarly cards like that on her. Again, not including Y'shtola herself, this deck rounds out to about $43, and that is our deck number 1. Reminder that every single deck is linked in the video description box below. And now, on to deck number 2. In our second spot is Vivi Ornithir, the primary reason that I had to exclude the commander price from these deck lists, because Vivi is over $50 all on his own. Vivi has 11,300 decks right now, potentially on its way to eclipsing Y'shtola. This Black Mage is, of course, broken in half. The mana production, the damage output, the ever-increasing number of counters, this little guy is something special. But just because Vivi is expensive doesn't mean that his entire deck has to be. The 99 of this deck comes to $49.40. And of course, quite predictably, it's a stormy spellslinger bunch of nonsense, ready to terrorize your opponents with supercharged, extra potent turns. As a quick note, when you're looking at these deck lists yourself, depending on your own personal settings and which vendors you choose, the prices might appear different than they do on my settings, but you can obviously see here in this video how I've been tracking these costs. This deck does stormy spellslingery things, so if you've ever seen decks like Veyron go off before, then you're probably pretty familiar with this game plan. Like Y'shtola, this deck can also lean into curiosity effects with the commander's damage trigger. Once we get the chance to chain a couple of spells together, it's really just off to the races, getting mana off of things like Stormkiln Artist, drawing tons more cards. Little cantrips go a really long way in this deck, maintaining our spell velocity by replacing themselves and triggering all of our mages for even more benefits again and again and again. This is one of the reasons why Spellslinger decks are actually usually very reasonable to build on a budget. So many of the cards that grease the wheels of decks like these are very cheap to acquire. I put a small number of power-up cards in here too, so that Vivi can add even more mana to our pool to keep the chain going, which is just plain nasty, to be honest. And of course, this deck needs some counter spells and defensive protection effects like Magic Tamper and Slip Out the Back, because everyone at the table knows how potent Vivi is, which means he's got a huge target on his back from minute one. I'd say our budget MVPs are cards like these. Neurok Stealth Suit is an infamous budget protection piece. I think Amphibian Downpour is way powerful in general, but it's especially good in a deck like this, that casts this many spells and that needs to stymie a bunch of aggression from the rest of the table, who are going to come after us because we are clearly the archenemy. And Mizzix's Mastery is only $1 right now. Casting that card with even just 1 or 2 damage mages in play often means GG. If you want to go above this list's $49.40 threshold, then I recommend these as your primary upgrades. They probably look familiar. Ophidian Eye and Sigil of Sleep don't just work great for Y'shtola, they work even better with Vivi. But also, Harmonic Prodigy supercharging all of your mages is a real piece of work. And that right there is deck number 2. Again, if you want to check it out, you can find the link in the description box below. Hey, real quick, popping in for a short interlude, and I appreciate you in advance because this will be a little bit cheesy. And I know that this is a total long shot, but okay, well, so I posted on socials this week that very early next month at the start of August will be my birthday. And also, weirdly enough, we're actually on track to hit 100K subscribers here on YouTube, probably by the end of August. But, you know, who knows? With a boost, if more people did decide to subscribe between now and then, it could be possible that we actually get to 100K by my birthday at the start of August instead. I don't know, it'd just be really cool to get there. It would be really neat if that lined up. I mean, it's going to be amazing to get there no matter when that happens. Being on track for 100K subscribers at all is such a milestone. And I, more than anything, just wanted to convey my appreciation to everyone out there for making that happen for us. We're very, very moved. That's so freaking cool. But yeah, I wanted to shout it out here. If you've ever thought of subscribing before, but you haven't yet, I just hope you please consider it. And also, if it does make sense for you to support us on Patreon, this show can't happen without all of the support that we get over there from folks too. And we've got perks to convey our gratitude, like exclusive content and things like that. So if that all makes sense for you, please consider it. Thank you so much for hearing me out. And now let's get you back to your regularly scheduled budget deck lists. On to deck number 3, Sephiroth, the third most popular Final Fantasy commander with 7,900 decks to his name. Mono black. Now this is my comfort zone. Aristocrats and death triggers? Hell yeah. Flipping Sephiroth isn't honestly even that hard. A single one of those fleshbag style creatures that forces everyone to sacrifice will cause all 4 players in a typical pod to lose a creature, satisfying that trigger and sending us into permanent Blood Artist Sephiroth emblem territory. This will be news to absolutely no one. Aristocrats decks like to play a lot of creatures. Like a lot of creatures. These can all be converted into damage as they die. And not just that, but Aristocrats decks flourish off of the cards that will turn death triggers into even more card draw. We don't play quite as many instants as other strategies do, but every creature represents multiple payoff avenues, so we like keeping that creature count high and playing creatures that can come back or that will make us even more tokens for even more fodder. Excluding Sephiroth himself, this deck comes to $49.60. A bunch of amazing sacrifice outlets and aristocrats like Conrad and Friends are uncommons and commons, so this is yet another strategy that doesn't need to destroy your wallet to make a big impact on the battlefield. Additionally, you'll notice how this deck's mana curve is quite low, an average mana cost of just 2.5. So we're not playing a ton of mana acceleration because so much of our deck is very low to the ground. As long as we keep our pace and hit our land drops consistently, we'll be pretty dang good. And the way that we can do that is just by eating our own creatures. Aristocrats decks are not precious about a single thing on their board. Everything we own is killable, often by our own hand, if it means that we can keep moving forward in one way or another. Frankly, if I end up getting a copy of Sephiroth, I might just have to build this deck myself. It looks amazing, and I had so much fun building it. These are 3 amazing budget MVP cards for this deck. Deadly Tempest is my favorite budget board wipe. Spoiler alert for a year-old Shuffle Up and Play episode, but if you watched that episode, then you know that this card is game-winningly good. I think Wake the Dead is also extremely underrated for this strategy. An opponent doesn't even have to attack for us to be able to cast this spell. You can just whoopsie-daisy cast this during an opponent's combat step to get back like 4 creatures and then kill them all again for instant speed, bunch of death triggers that will give you that extra push for potentially lethal damage. And instants like Not Dead After All are clutch budget protection in a deck like this. Someone is trying to exile our creature, alright, in response we'll cast a spell like this one and then use our sacrifice outlet to kill our creature instead, which immediately brings it back, fizzling that person's removal spell, and of course giving us a death trigger along the way. If you're splurging more on this deck, then here are some cards that I wish had fit into our budget. Cryptcast, because, of course, Mono Black just loves this card. Ayara for more pain and more card advantage, what a beauty. And War and Soul Trader is just a monstrously good sack outlet. If you like Aristocrats, consider giving this deck a try. That is our deck number 3, but now we'll move to deck number 4. On Sephiroth's heels, who else could it be but Cloud? He's the 4th place Final Fantasy commander and has a fitting 7,000 decks to his name right now. Draw cards for attacking people with equipped creatures and get treasure if we meet the 7 power threshold? Don't mind if I do. This was actually kind of a tough deck to brew. Equipment is a much harder strategy to do on a budget because the best equipment, and frankly even some simple stuff like Sword of the Animist, are often like $5 each or more. Still, we got in right under the wire at $49.99. If folks are familiar with Akiri Fearless Voyager decks, a Boros commander who also draws cards for attacking multiple players with equipped creatures, then this list should look very familiar to you. I'm gonna level with you, I think the current builds that we're seeing for Cloud so far are getting a little too hung up on the 7 power thing, and not focusing enough on the drawing cards for attacking with equipped creatures thing. That's the real payoff in my eyes. We want that card velocity. And the treasure tokens are a nice cherry on top, but it shouldn't pull our focus from that card draw. I'd personally rather get 3 cards each combat versus 1 card and 2 treasures each combat. So to make that goal more reliable, our budget equipment options here lean strongly into the Living Weapon, Job Select, and 4 Mirrodin cards that come auto-attached to a creature token. Don't play Cloud too early. Cloud is best when we set the stage for him, like if we have a Living Weapon in play and some other spare equipment lying around so that then Cloud can come down, auto-attach that rogue equipment to himself, and then attack immediately with another equipped creature to start drawing cards right away. Learn your timing and he'll reward you best. And over time, all of our support creatures will make those equip costs super negligible so that we can start shifting battle plans as we need, going full Voltron if necessary, or continuing to go wide if that still makes the most sense, which, with all these creatures that amplify our equipped team, may indeed be the case. Also, side note, I'm very fond of the equipment in this deck that simultaneously serve as removal spells. Our budget MVP cards in this deck, I can't pick just 3. Some of these are $2 or $3, but I had to make room for them. Myria taps our equipment for mana. Amazing. Goldwarden's Gambit is awesome to play if our board was wiped because it will give us a body back for every equipment that we control and then auto-attach them so that we can get right back into the game. It's so much fun to resolve this spell. Aki Battle Squad is my apology that we can't play the Naya Tifa in this budget version of the deck, but it also gives us extra combats like Tifa does, and more combats means drawing more cards from Cloud. But okay, my actual favorite card in the deck is Annie Joins Up. Damage when it hits the field, and from then on out, it doubles all of our triggered abilities from all of our legends. This deck has so many legendary creatures, more cards from Akiri and Cloud and Kutsiel, more tokens off of Barret and Chishiro. It's so dang good. Now, if you're powering up the deck beyond this budget, Hexblade Wallbreaker is your best friend. What a knockout, I wish we could play it here. There are also so many other impactful equipment too. I'm sure that you have your own favorites, and I'm sorry that so many of them are too pricey for this list here. Buster Sword, for instance, is super great, but I also advise some Indestructible or Hexproof for our commander, and the classic equipment Finders from Stoneforge Mystic to Nazan and his hammer, and even the new Mono White Cloud too are very, very good. There's lots of room to customize this deck as you upgrade further. And with that, we go from this hero to another villain. Time for deck number 5, Kefka. Kefka is the 5th most popular commander from this set, currently with 6,700 decks, and my lord, he is miserable. Every time he arrives on the field or when he attacks, he forces everyone to discard, and then we will draw based off of what was discarded. And if you get to the point of ever flipping him to the back half, then he'll draw cards when our opponents lose life, which, yes, does open the door for potential infinite combos. There's no way around it. This deck is the bad guy. Hand attack is a very villainous thing in EDH, so I only recommend building this deck if you are properly prepared with the table to be the arch enemy. This deck scoots in at $49.39, and because this deck is on a budget, it's not going to look exactly like a lot of other Kefka builds out there right now. A lot of other Kefka decks will lean into Migrum and Liliana's Caress effects that deal damage when our opponents discard cards. However, since opponents' hands often run out of cards very fast in dedicated discard decks, those Kefka lists also use wheels to refill opponents' hands to continue dealing even more damage. On a budget, we can't afford all of those things, the discard damagers and wheel effects, so instead, we're leaning hard control, particularly with the absolute best and most beastly thing that a Kefka deck can do, blink. Someone targeting our commander? Well, blink him, fizzling their spell, and then Kefka will re-enter and force everyone to discard again, which will cause us to draw cards. Every blink spell that we cast on Kefka is basically a siphon mind. It's so disgusting. And from there, we don't even need to use a wheel to refill people's hands. We're not going to deal damage based off of discard, we're just going to secure the board and then pilfer from people. By making everyone discard stuff and by killing a bunch of creatures, we can turn enemy graveyards into our own benefit by casting spells that will get stuff back from each of their graveyards. And if we need to close the game faster, we can flip Kefka onto the side that draws cards when opponents lose life, and pair it up with a Niv Mizzet or Psychosis Crawler that make them lose life when we draw cards, which creates a loop and will drain our enemies' remaining life totals all the way. For budget MVPs, I mean, every blink spell that you can find is so good here. But also, Naban doubling our Wizard of a Commander is very, very powerful, and I'll shout out artifact lands or multi-typed spells like Kindred Instance. Discarding one of these to our Kefka trigger yields more types for us to draw more cards off of Kefka's triggered ability, which is a neat incidental benefit. And if you're going even further with this deck, then I suggest these cards. Surly Badgersaur and Bone Miser give us benefits for our own discards, which can add up very fast, and I recommend better reanimation spells as well, to more efficiently pilfer from enemy graveyards that we filled up, so that once we've seized control of the game, we can end things even faster. Like I said, this deck is the villain. Play it accordingly and responsibly. That closes the book on deck number 5, so now we're on to deck number 6. Choco, Seeker of Paradise. With 6,500 decks to its name, Choco, Seeker of Paradise is a land and birds commander. Every bird we attack with lets us reveal more cards from the top of our deck, keeping one for our hand and slamming all the lands among them into play. That causes a huge mess of landfall triggers, which is fitting because Chocobos get stronger when we get all those lands. Our birds and landfall deck here runs about $47.87 for the 99, and it's honestly pretty dang strong. A lot of birds care about flying, and our commander doesn't fly, which is important, but all of those birds optimizing and buffing up each other makes it easier for us to play a bunch of them and then swing in the air to get even more Choco triggers, so we don't really mind that disparity. Plus, I didn't know that there were so many cards that care about birds, from Castrol to Saz to Hermes to Tawnos. Notably, there are now also like 4 different coastal piracy type of effects, 4 mana blue enchantments or artifacts that draw us cards whenever our creatures hit another player. And we're going to play them all here because our evasive creatures and tokens are likely to hit our opponents in the air and therefore keep us flush with cards, which also helps make sure that we aren't too dependent on our commander to keep up our card velocity. Don't be afraid of a few big X spells too, by the way, because Choco's trigger will net us a lot of lands on the battlefield, so we want at least a few places to be able to put all of that mana, you know? And of course, if you're playing a deck that cares about lands, don't skimp on your land count. You need a decent number of lands for this deck to do its thing, so make sure that you're playing enough of them. To shout out some budget MVPs here, Angel of Emeria could not be more perfect for this deck. It makes bird tokens on landfall, that's literally our whole deal. Then Retreat to Emeria will turn all of the lands that we find during Choco's attack trigger into pump-ups during combat. With enough birds, this becomes a huge bonus buff that can absolutely secure us the game. Bower Passage, though, is my absolute favorite. So many of our creatures fly, but with this enchantment, flying creatures can't block them, which means for just 2 mana, we are making a whole bunch of our team just plain unblockable. Love it. Now, if you're going higher on budget, then obviously Traveling Chocobo is amazing. Soulcatcher's Airy is a unique bird pump effect too, get hyped about that, and type-specific cards like Raise the Palisade are a wrecking ball in any Kindred deck. I am also bummed that this deck can't afford like a Birds of Paradise, but it is an iconic card, and dang, we really want Flurry of Wings for this deck too. Landfall and Kindred decks can be great on a budget, but if you do splurge, all of these cards will really supercharge Choco decks a whole lot. Okie doke, are you ready for deck number 7? We here have Terra Magical Adept, the 5-color Saga commander, with about 5,500 decks to her name right now. And, like, holy crap, I thought that Tom Bombadil had already cornered the market on 5-color Saga decks, but Terra's really giving him a run for his money, reclaiming our enchantments and then copying them on her back half and going back to her front half with a huge burst of mana at the end. Our list comes in at $49.66. Predictably, this deck is chock full of sagas and saga creatures and enchantment creatures to give our commander lots of juicy targets. And of course, we're playing a big bunch of enchantress effects that will draw us lots of cards whenever we cast enchantment spells. Some of the best enchantresses are admittedly out of our budget, but we still have a lot of other enchantresses to choose from, not to mention a bunch of cards that will reduce the cost of all our enchantments, or that will just straight up give us a ton of mana for each enchantment we have. I think one of the most important things to know about saga decks is that, frankly, a lot of sagas are removal effects. By sheer accident, just by playing a lot of sagas, that means we're playing a very interactive deck. That also means that we're very fiddly as a deck, managing lots of lore counters and keeping track of chapters and all that, but it also means that we are slowing the game down more often than we're speeding the game up, and that turning all of that value into victory is something that we have to be very dedicated and conscious about. With enough copies of things, we'll get there for sure, but that could still take a little bit of time, so the point is we should make a concerted effort to press our advantage when we have it, and to get damage in when we have the opportunity. Oh, and P.S. I just love how many cards we have here that can copy our enchantments and or flicker them, or get a whole bunch of them back from the graveyard in case someone killed them all off. These are really cool tricks, and frankly, they're just quite cool ways to get a big push and late game surge when we need it. My favorite cards in the deck are these. Yenna helps us make even more copies, hell yes. Touch the Spirit Realm can either act as removal or flicker one of our saga creatures to reset if we need it. And can we all acknowledge how funny it is that Moonmist will transform our human commander for free? And since Wizards changed the rules to help make sure that sagas without counters on them don't automatically die, it just sets us up brilliantly. Just a very funny synergy I wanted to shout out. Now, this deck has the juiciest upgrades if you go higher on the price. I wish we could afford things like Tom Bombadil or Narcy in this deck. She's so amazing with sagas, so get them in here whenever you can for sure. Things like Knights of the Round and Bahamut are also just bonkers sagas to aim for down the line, but most of all, Yuna is who I would love to get in here too. Once again, lots of great areas to explore as you make this deck your own. Now, once again, this deck was right under the wire at $49.66, but now we're moving on to deck number 8. Here is our trance boy Kuja, the villainous force of my personal favorite Final Fantasy game. He's got about 5,000 decks in the EDHREC database right now. Kuja makes Black Mage tokens on his front half, and then when we have enough wizards, he'll flip into a wizard damage doubler. Disgustingly good. Technically, this deck came in at $50.03, excluding the commander, so I'm sorry that it's not under $50, feel free to yell at me in the comments about it. But as you may notice, 12 of those dollars are spent on just one card, the Harmonic Prodigy card that doubles all of the triggers from our wizard cards. I would normally not recommend doing this for a budget deck, spending $12 on one card, but the reason that I did it here is because when I put the rest of the list together, it was only $38. Burn is a great strategy to play on a budget, so I decided screw it, let's put the Prodigy in here. The funniest thing thing about this deck is that we can deal damage just by playing card draw spells. Card velocity for us means dealing even more damage, and that's so freaking hilarious to me. Hence why the deck is stuffed with so many card advantage effects. Much like Vivi, little spells that will get us an extra card here and there for a very low mana cost greases the wheels, and it all really adds up. And one of the great benefits of that is also that it makes our opening hands a lot more consistent too, since we're extra likely to have something in there that will give us access to even more spells down the line. That's a really nice added benefit, but also probably a pretty good lesson for your other EDH decks out there too. Are you playing enough versions of card advantage spells that will help you feel like more of your opening hands are consistently safe keeps? Just some food for thought. Alright, for this deck too, I've got to shout out my favorite MVP budget cards in the deck, which are probably these. Incite Rebellion could end a game if your enemies get a little bit too big for their britches. It's just hysterical. Backlash and her sister spell named Delirium are red-black 3-mana instants that can turn a big creature into its owner's worst nightmare, a fantastic extra source of big damage. And don't even get me started on Grievous Wound. Every time that our wizards ping the enchanted player here, their life total will get cut in half. And we have a lot of freaking wizards, and every single one of those pings resolves individually. Ping cut in half, ping cut in half, ping cut in half. This does not just KO an opponent, this straight up deletes them from the asset list. For a bigger budget, well, Roaming Throne is going to be an obvious pick, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean it's not amazing here. Soulfeme is great too, another damage doubler, and honestly, even just like a Lightning Greaves to keep people from killing Kuja as much as they'll want to, seems like it could be pretty important. We're burning everyone, making us persona non grata and the likely target for many opponents' removal spells, so a little more protection would go a long way. That was deck number 8, but we're moving now to another 5-color commander at spot number 9, the Wandering Minstrel. Wandering Minstrel a thing of thread and patches, the 9th place Final Fantasy commander with 4,600 decks. This is a 5-color landfall commander who makes our lands come into play untapped, makes us elemental tokens, and buffs our stuff in the late game for each town we have. Since there are 23 towns in total, that could be quite a lot of buffing indeed. I thought initially this deck would be tough to build on a budget, but nope. This deck comes in at $49.22, a happy surprise, but it also actually makes a lot of sense because every town, except for one, is super duper cheap. And that fills out most of the room that we have in the mana base. So it turns out all that we need to do from there is include a good handful of strong but low cost landfall cards, like Scoot Swarm and the Omnaths. In this deck, I prioritized landfall cards that will help us get more bodies onto the battlefield, personally, because the more bodies that we have, like tokens, the more that we can do with our Minstrel's buffing ability to trounce our opposition. We definitely still want a couple of other landfall damage payoffs, like Sabotender and Iridescent Vine Lasher, things like that, just in case our opponents gum up the ground or can stop our combat capabilities. So, it's nice to have plan B backup options, but in general, I still think that landfall payoffs that give us more tokens is really the way to go here. Of all the decks we've seen so far, this one probably looks the most familiar to a lot of folks out there. This is a very classic landfall setup, and the majority of new cards in the 99 that the commander explicitly cares about are in the land section, all of those towns, rather than being in the creatures or in the spells sections, which leaves us even more room in the 99 for all of our usual landfall standbys. But also, happy accident, that does have the bonus side effect for us where all of those landfall strategies and landfall cards have been reprinted a lot, making a bunch of these powerhouse cards very easy for us to acquire, and therefore making this commander easier to build on a budget. My favorite cards in the deck are these. Omo turns creatures and lands into all types, so we can have even more towns and even more elementals, which turns out to be pretty important because this deck, low-key, cares about those elementals. Omnath cards, for instance, care when the elementals die. But also, our commander makes elemental tokens off of his trigger, fueling cards like Risen Reef, which is amazing value. Also, I'm going to shout out a removal spell here, Broken Bond, as a sometimes forgotten but clutch piece for a landfall deck. Landfall decks are so proactive that the biggest mistake that brewers make with them is forgetting to pack enough removal to stop all the other players at the table from doing their thing. Don't get too lost in your own sauce here, Pack good removal, especially because some of those removal spells are very great for a landfall strategy in the first place. For higher budget Minstrel players, well, obviously the only town that we can't afford here is Starting Town, so that's a good place to well, start. And you want more velocity in the deck for sure. AC is an unreasonable Magic card, and the Teamer Omnath washing the Cheeto dust off of his fingers is a really great source of card advantage too. Again, classics of the genre. That leaves us just one deck, the 10th place commander, which is fitting because it's from Final Fantasy X, Tidus, Yuna's Guardian. I know, I grew up saying Tidus too. The canon of Tidus versus Tidus is a big ol' mess. If you want to, argue about it in the comments. That sounds fun. This commander's honestly just incredible. Moving counters around and drawing a card and proliferating once per turn, that's the type of thing that makes OG Atraxa very proud. I was fortunate to get this precon and I've been having a blast with it. On the shelf though, it's usually selling for like $100, so this here is a version that will cost you $48.34 instead. My favorite thing when playing with this deck is mucking with Saga creatures' lore counters to repeat their effects, which is often a great source of extra removal triggers. In this deck, we can't afford a lot of the Saga creatures that come from the precon itself, of course, but we do still have a good few, and I enjoy every single one of them. I'll confess that I just couldn't help myself. I had to make room for some classic +1 counters cards like Herald of Secret Streams to make the team unblockable, or Kami of Whispered Hopes to give us more mana and to increase the number of +1 counters whenever we place them on our creatures or whenever our commander is passing those counters around. Are both of those cards like $4 each? Yes. Did that eat into my budget? Also yes. But is it still worth it? Yeah, those cards are amazing in this type of deck, so I just had to include them here. I'll note that this deck's got a low mana curve too, and also make sure that most of your mana acceleration in the deck is at the 2 mana spot. Since our commander is 3 mana, we don't want to have to decide between casting ramp or casting our commander on that turn. I much prefer to, say, play a ramp piece on turn 2, and then on turn 3 we can get out something that will carry a counter, and then on turn 4 we can play another 2-drop plus our 3 mana commander and start the draw and proliferate engine going from there. Or, alternatively, we can play a 2-drop on turn 2, hopefully something that's wearing a +1 counter, so that then on turn 3 we can cast our commander and start the value train that way. In either case, ramp at the 2 mana spot works better than ramp at the 3 mana spot, since a 3 mana ramp effect would get in the way of both of those plans just a little bit. And I do think this type of thing is pretty important. We've got some very efficiently costed creatures scattered about this deck, so careful attention to the mana costs of our very early turns will set us up for success down the line. Here are our deck's best budget blitzballers. Requisition Raid is removal that can also give our team a counter, which is precisely what we need. After all, we can't do much moving counters around if we don't have any ways of acquiring counters in the first place. One with the Kami is an amazing piece of insurance. Basically, all of our creatures will be modified since they're wearing counters, so when someone tries to blow up the board, one with the Kami will give us a bunch of tokens left over, which sets us up beautifully for a counterattack or to get our strategy up and running again. If nothing else, once this is on a creature, it will deter opponents from wanting to blow everything up, which also works out great in our favor so that we can keep bumping up our board. And finally, Bulwark Ox is fantastic. Ignore the saddle text, we don't care about any of that. What we care about is that this is a 25-cent card that can sacrifice itself to give each creature we control with a counter on it hexproof and indestructible. Absolutely perfect protection piece. You should play this one even if you're not building this deck on a budget. And of course, speaking of not on a budget, if you're upgrading this list, obviously there are fantastic pieces in the precon that you could pursue, but also there are these. The Ozolith is an amazing piece of counter protection, ensuring that your counters won't disappear. This is such a powerful card. Wave Goodbye is so good, much like the Damnable Verdict we already have in the list. Arwen gives us even more counters and is just so freaking wonderful. Those keyword counters are bonkers good here. And then Danny Pink is Busto. Just a good old guy named Dan drawing us bucketfuls of cards. This one really kicks the deck into high gear. Once again, this version of the deck costs $48.34, and don't forget, every single one of these 10 deck lists can be found in the description box below. So if you're so inclined, head on over to my Architect profile or follow those links to check them out. And there we have it, 10 decks from Final Fantasy for $50 each. I hope that these are useful and helpful for you along your brewing journey. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to help us hit that 100k subscribers by my birthday next month, it would mean the world to me if you considered giving us a follow. Are you building any of these decks? Do you have any spicy tech for them? Let other folks know what your budget picks are for Final Fantasy Commanders down in the comments. And until next time, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.